Hey guys, it's Kedar, my review for the latest new series on Netflix, Sex Education. And what this first season is essentially about is we center on the character of Otis. He is someone who is very socially awkward. In high school, he really does not have many friends or anything like that. His mother, Jean, on the other hand, is a sex therapist, and because of that, he has a lot of knowledge about that stuff, and after opening up to this one student, he basically, this one student ends up taking him under her wing. They end up starting this, sex clinic where they're going to give advice to people about their sexual lives and things like that. While Otis also tries to overcome some of his awkwardness and maybe try to advance some of his sexual knowledge as well. And that's really all I'm going to say. So, Sex Education, similar to a show I reviewed last year, The End of the Fucking World, I really did not know too much about this show, really at all. It was a show that I knew was coming out on Netflix, but I didn't really watch a trailer or anything like that. I basically went into it pretty blind, and, with a title like this, I wasn't really expecting much. I mean, it seemed to me like it was just going to be any other, raunchy teen comedy, and I'm very happy to report that Sex Education is really not that at all. This show is far more complex than I really could have expected. It's very well written. There's a lot to really love about it, but we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And that's one of the best things about this entire show. Everyone here is extremely well casted. There are so many great actors within this show. But we first have to talk about Asa Butterfield, who I've always been a fan of. I liked him in Hugo and things like that. But here, he is on a whole other level for me. I think this is easily the best performance I've seen from him. His character, Otis, is someone who is very complex. There's a reason why he is so awkward. There's a reason why he doesn't really open up to people as much, and you see how him becoming this sort of therapist really starts to strengthen him. It starts to, set him on a better path in life, and I really did like seeing that. I think he has some incredible scenes within the show. He's a very likable main character, and like I said, I think this is probably his strongest performance yet. And then, of course, Gillian Anderson, someone who just always is a highlight in pretty much everything she does, and that's no exception here. She, once again, gives a really great performance. Jean is a character who is very complicated, and there's a lot of interesting stuff that she's been through, and Anderson really shines, especially in the back half of the season when we really do get into her character more, but she also is a lot of fun to watch. Her and Otis obviously do not have the typical mother-son relationship, and their scenes together are really strong. I really loved what both of them did here, and the show itself is worth recommending alone just for the relationship between those two, which I really did love. And then the rest of the cast also just does some incredible work. Ncuti Gatwa as Eric is incredible in this show. He is Otis's best friend. He is gay, but he's not exactly open about it. He is kind of bashed for it, and people don't really accept him for it, and he doesn't really come from he comes from a family that isn't really on board with it either, and his character I really loved. I think he did an incredible job where he ends up going. I really loved a lot. Someone else who really impressed me, though, was Mckee as the character of Maeve. Never seen this actress before, but she blew me away this season. I mean, she has some absolutely incredible work. The character, again, of Maeve is very complicated. We'll get more into her with the writing and things like that, but I really loved where she ended up going. Seeing her, she just has such natural chemistry with pretty much everyone. I thought she did such an incredible job. Everyone really is such a standout. Amy Lee Wood is great as Aimee, Maeve's sort of confidant, which I really did love. I really like the actor that plays Adam. I think his name was Swindells. He was also really great in this show. There are just so many great actors here. Everyone really just gives it 100%, and that's something you can't really say when it comes to shows like this. Usually the acting isn't really anything amazing, but really everyone just kills it in these roles, and I was really impressed by the entire cast here. But now I really want to get to the directing for this show, which I think out of everything, that's going to be the thing that people are most skeptical about. When you hear a title like Sex Education, what immediately comes to your mind? Something like in the vein of American Pie. Now, I can't personally say if this is like American Pie or not, because I actually have never seen those movies. But what I can say is that, like I said, this is not your typical raunchy, over-the-top, high school show. That's not at all what this show is. Sure, there are a lot of funny moments, a lot, and there are definitely a lot of moments that really did make me laugh, and a lot of the humor does come from how awkward things are, how it's someone like Otis who is giving all of this advice and things like that, and the various clients that he takes on, they're going through, some situations that at first glance are really funny, but the thing that really surprised me is the heart that the show has. It has a huge amount of heart, much more than I was expecting, and I think they did a really great job with capturing that. Every single character in this show, even when things are completely ridiculous, they always do it with a sense of heart and a sense of care for these characters, and that's something that I just was not really expecting, and I think the emotional moments actually worked really well, and they really did work in conjunction with the comedy. It's because of how funny it was, it made the emotional stuff that much more effective, and I think they did a really great job with combining those two things together, something that I just was not really expecting, but the directing in the show, I think, is very much spot on, and again, it's far better than I really could have expected. And that also goes for the writing of the show, which is also a very different show than you may be expecting, because the trailer for the show, it sold it as this is a boy and his mom is a sex therapist and they have this complicated relationship. It's not really about that. That is a part of the show, but the central focus is on Otis and him and his friends, working this underground sex clinic, and them basically trying to help these characters not only get in touch with themselves sexually and get themselves in touch with their problems they're going through sexually, but also their personal problems. A lot of these characters, they're very complex. Take someone like Maeve, for example. At first glance, Maeve is someone who is very experienced. A lot of people have slut-shamed her. She has a really bad reputation in the school. Every single guy is making sexual advances at her, and she rarely turns them down, but there's a reason why she's like that. We realize that she's had a very complicated past, and it's something that's gone on for a while, and I think they did just such a great job with the realism in this show. None of these characters feel like caricatures. They all feel like real people, and they do such a great job with that. Someone as silly as, say, Lily, this girl who is literally so set on losing her virginity that she will go to every single guy, not caring how they look, not caring if they're experienced, just if they're a male and they have a penis, she will go to them and will try to have sex with them. And you'd think something like that, they would just make her just sort of a one-note silly character. No, there is actually a reason why she's like that, and I was so impressed by the way they went about these characters. Much more complex, like I said, than I was expecting, and I think they did a really great job with that. A lot of shows, they would try to portray these characters in a way, they maybe give them some nuances, but a lot of them probably would be fairly one-dimensional, and there really isn't a single character in this show that felt that way to me. I really did not feel anyone was like that. It did not really feel like anyone was like a butt of a joke. It did not feel like any of the humor was at the expense of these characters, and that's something that I really was not expecting. And the show itself, it delves into some fairly complex issues. Apart from the sex, it also deals with the idea of someone being confused with their identity, who they really are, how they're trying to identify themselves. The idea of gender dysphoria gets into that idea. It gets into the idea of someone who is going through a lot of abuse and things like that. There's a whole pregnancy storyline, which I'm not going to get into too much, but there's a lot of dark stuff that the show touches upon that I just really was not expecting, especially when it comes to the character of Eric, someone who, like I said, he is gay, but it's not in a sense where people accept him for it. He is very much bashed for it, and people do not really take take it very nicely at all. And seeing what he has to go through, it's really heartbreaking to watch. And they did a really great job with not trying to beat you over the head with it. It could have been something where it's heavily dramatized and it doesn't feel real, but the way they did it in a manner where they were so careful with what they showed, in a way where it just made it that much more effective, and you really did care for his character in that way, and I was very impressed with the way they handled that. But again, I want to reiterate, the show can still be a lot of fun. There are a lot of hilarious moments in the show. The opening scene is absolutely hysterical, but it's hysterical in a sense where if the opening scene does not grab you and you aren't hooked from the opening scene, I don't think you're going to like this show, because it just perfectly throws you into the exact kind of show it's going to be. It gives you the humor you're going to get, and that's something that I was very impressed by. You know, it's a scene where at first you may be a little bit thrown off by it, but eventually it develops a tone that I think you can kind of jive with, and I think they did a really good job with just not really being afraid to show things. I mean, the show is quite graphic when it comes to the sexual stuff, and I mean, what else do you really expect from a show called Sex Education? It's not going to be toned down at all. So if you're offended easily, or there's certain things you just don't want to see, might not be the show for you. But again, I think they did a good job of establishing its tone really quickly and never really deviating from that. The show does get deeper, like I said, as it goes on, but I think for the most part they handled it very well, and I was overall really impressed by it. But again, with so many characters, you know, being introduced to us, you would think that maybe this show would be a little bit unbalanced, and it's really not. I mean, sure, there are a lot of characters, but the focus remains on Otis. Otis is the focus of this entire show. He is the main character, and they do a really good job with that, because you'll have a character, you know, you'll see them progress in terms of what they're trying to do with a specific goal, but it also helps out Otis because he starts to gain more confidence. He starts to feel like he has more of a purpose. You know, he starts to grow more interest in Maeve and things like that. And that's something, again, that can be very hard to do when you have so many characters. And a lot of shows that I watch that are teen shows, Riverdale, for example, it can be very hard for them to, you know, figure out what to focus on and to know who their focus is. But this show knows what its central focus is, and that's something that they handle very well. The writing, all in all, is just very good here, much better than I was expecting, and I was very impressed by it. But the cinematography in the show is also really good. You know, there are some really great shots that I definitely really did enjoy. Nothing absolutely outstanding, but the show has a real sort of 80s feel to it, and a lot of people have thought that the show is in the 80s, but actually a lot of the show, it is paying tribute to the 80s and things like that. A lot of things apparently were based off of the 80s. Most of the music they play is not modern music, and I actually thought that was really cool. It's a good way to keep your show in a certain time period, but also make it feel timeless. It's a show that I think over time, you know, even years from now, is still going to remain relevant. They don't try to overuse any sort of technology or any sort of colloquialisms from nowadays. And again, for a show like this that is geared towards a specific demographic, it can be hard to know how to cater, you know, how to do that without catering to them and, you know, just having all this cheap sort of dialogue. But they actually handle that really well. I was impressed with the visuals on the show. I think, again, the look and the feel of it is really good. The score, I also really did enjoy a lot. There's a lot of great music that's played throughout the show. And the editing, the episodes, you know, typically they clock in at like 40-something minutes. It's one of the shorter Netflix shows I've watched. The longest episode, I believe, was only like 52 minutes. And for a Netflix show, I mean, that's pretty short. And it's very easy to get through in the way. It's extremely bingeable, and it's definitely one that I think, you know, once you get into it, you're probably going to get hooked in right away, and you might just find yourself binging the entire season. Honestly, if I would have had more time and there wasn't as many things as I was watching, I could have just binged the entire season, but I wanted to space it out, and I did, and that's why you're getting your review now. But again, I will say that I think they did a very good job with spacing, you know, with the pacing and things like that, and I was very impressed by that overall. Now, in terms of flaws with this season, there's not really a ton of stuff, because like I said, there's a lot to love here. The characters are rock solid, but there are a few things that does kind of bring down the season. One, Otis and Jean's relationship, throughout most of the season, I really did like it. I think it is very well done. However, we don't get as much as you might have wanted, and that wasn't a problem with me because I knew that they were going to dive more heavily into it later on, and they do. They do dive into it a bit more in the later episodes, and I definitely did enjoy that. But there is one thing that comes up in the finale that just did not work for me. And I understood what they were trying to do, but it just made it a little bit hard to understand the relationship between the two of them, and I didn't really understand what they were trying to say there. Also, there are a few characters that at first I thought were a bit underused. However, virtually a lot of my complaints on the character side of things were actually retroactively fixed in the back half of the season. There is one character, though, that I felt could have had a little bit more to do, and maybe they'll have more in the second season of the show, but as far as this first season goes, I just did not think they were very satisfying in terms of where their arc ends. But now I really want to get into spoilers, just talking about where I think next season's going to go. Now, there definitely are a few things I could talk about, like, Maeve's pregnancy and abortion and things like that. Like, that was something that was extremely shocking. You did not expect for that to happen, especially this early into the season. I was not expecting for them to deal with something like that. But the way it was handled and the way that Maeve ended up getting an abortion, I thought was really risky, but they handled it very well, and I was very impressed by the way that was done. But what I particularly loved about the Maeve storyline is her whole relationship with Otis, because these two, eventually they're going to end up together. Like, it's one of those will they, won't they couples. We're very much rooting for them, and I think they do a good job with that. Um, but the thing that these two have is they have this really good understanding of each other. For Otis, he is very anxiety ridden because of what happened with his father. Now, this is something he hasn't told Maeve yet, but I'm sure eventually he will tell her. But the big scene I love with Maeve is when she finally reveals to him how all of this started. How did she become this, like, sex symbol in the school? Why is everyone trying to get with her? And it's because of this. It's all basically based on this lie, because she wasn't going to perform. She wasn't going to help out this boy, and he ended up spreading this rumor about her, and ever since then she just had this really bad reputation. And it really just makes you understand Maeve more. It makes you understand what she's going through, how she basically has kind of turned into what people have made her out to be, and she's basically kind of been forced to do that. And you really do feel bad for her in that sense. But also her relationship with Jackson, I thought was also really well done, because on a surface, he's kind of like the perfect boyfriend. I mean, he's someone who he wants something a lot more serious. He doesn't just want her for sex. He wants to be open and honest with her. But at the same time, there's a lot of pressure that is mounted onto him. He's in the swim team. He has two moms who expect a lot out of him. We see. However, the biggest stuff I want to talk about is everything that goes down with Eric, because I was not expecting them to dive nearly as deep into what they ended up doing. Because obviously, throughout the whole season, we established the fact that, like I said, Eric is someone who just isn't really well accepted. He's constantly being bullied by Adam and things like that. But once he got into, when he was in drag, and he ended up he ended up getting bashed and things like that, and he ended up they end up beating him up, and that was extremely shocking to see. But again, it's something that does happen, and I like that they really did make Eric go through this arc, because it really does bring him closer to accepting who he is. It makes him, for a brief second, he thinks that he needs to be in normal clothes and things like that, but it makes him start to embrace, who he actually is, and I really did like seeing that. But the best part of it for me is where they end up going with the ending of it all, because as we know at the end, he ends up having to clean up the band room because of what he did with Adam, his worst enemy, and these two end up getting closer than ever. The whole season, Adam's been bullying him, and Adam was a character that you knew something was going on. He had a very contentious relationship with his father, who's just constantly on him and beating him down, which the first episode, I was very intrigued by his character. I like that he, at the surface, is just this, like, cocky guy, but you realize that there's a lot of pressure that's going on with him. And then, of course, the end, where we realize that all this time, he actually has been gay, and he's been in love with Eric and they end up having sex. I mean, that was extremely shocking to me. And at first, I didn't like it. I thought it was just something they kind of did for shock value and just to make you wait for the next season. But I like that we had a scene at the end where they actually talk it out. And, Eric is like, what just happened? Why did you never tell anyone? And Adam says to never tell anyone that this happened. And we realize that he's actually getting shipped off to military school, which is devastating to watch, knowing what he actually wants, and that you can tell that this is not at all what he wants to do. But again, because his father just always seems to have the final say and he's very militant in that way, he really has no choice but to listen to him. And that was very hard to watch, but I thought they handled all that really well. I really loved where the Adam character ended up going, and that's another character that could have just been so one note and so whatever, but they really dived a lot deeper than I was expecting, and I'm very excited to see where they end up going with him. I mean, I'm sure it's going to be really sad to see, but I'm excited to further explore the Eric and Adam dynamic. I think eventually these two are going to end up in a legitimate relationship, and that's something I'm excited to see. And it really does make a lot of sense when you think about it, because, throughout the first episode, we knew he couldn't get hard in front of Aimee, and now it all makes sense. He was probably gay all this time. He was probably questioning himself, and I'm really excited to dive a little bit deeper into that. I think that's definitely going to be very interesting to watch. Speaking of Aimee, I like that she is now going out on her own. She doesn't need those girls in her life, which, okay, that was a bit predictable. I expected for them to end up doing that, where she, ends up going on her own. But I like that she is closer with Maeve now. I like the dynamic that those two have, and I'm excited to see where that goes. But of course, the last thing to talk about is everything that goes down with Otis, because that's something that I'm very excited to talk about. I will admit, the one storyline that I thought was a little bit rushed was the stuff between him and Ola. I understand why Ola was in there, obviously, because Jean was in a relationship with her father, and the two of them have this very sort of interesting relationship where, similar to Maeve, her father wants something deeper, but Jean doesn't really want to do that. She seems like she is very closed off and she doesn't really want any sort of commitment, which is understandable considering what happened with her husband and things like that. And as far as things go between Jean and Otis, like I said, throughout most of the season, I was really enjoying it. In fact, I was enjoying a lot of the stuff we got in this finale, especially the scene where Otis actually calls Jean out on being too intrusive, which she was. She was being way too intrusive into his life, asking him questions that he just didn't want to, and I like that basically she decided to take a step back there. But also the conversation that Otis has with Jean when he tells her, how he doesn't really want her to be with Ola's father anymore. He just doesn't really, he makes him very uncomfortable, and then she ends up going with him. And again, I understand that Jean is trying something out, but I didn't really like the way this was done. It felt like Jean was telling her son that, he's a 16-year-old boy and that she believes in him and that things are going to turn out great. And then she just goes against his wishes. And that just did not work for me. Throughout most of the season, I really liked their relationship, but that was the one thing that just didn't really work for me. And I think they could have handled it a lot better. That being said, though, I really did like the way things ended between Ola and Otis, where, he actually ends up kissing her. He goes through with it. He's finally able to masturbate. We realize he's kind of starting to be able to overcome his anxiety, and hopefully this is going to get him to open up to people more. He's going to continue the clinic probably, and I'm really excited to see where that all ends up going. There's a lot of potential heading into season 2, and I really do hope they dive into it a lot more. I want to see more stuff with Aimee. I want Adam to have a bigger role next season. Even characters like Lily, who we now know, the whole reason she craves for sex is because she just she feels like she needs it, and it's something that she doesn't feel satisfied until she really does get it. And I'm excited to see where they end up going with that whole story, if she ends up having sex, because I think in the end she's going to realize that there are more important things in the world, and it's going to happen, and she's probably not really going to feel anything. But I'm excited to see where that ends up going. There's just a lot of potential moving forward for a lot of these storylines, and I really do hope they take full advantage of it, because there's so much they can do, and I'm really interested in seeing where everything's going to go. Speaking of Lily, my favorite scene maybe of the entire season is actually when him and Lily are trying to have sex, and we realize that Otis is not just afraid. You know, he's not just doesn't just have anxiety, but he is outright afraid of any sort of sexual contact because of what happened with his father. It triggers this horrible memory where he remembers his father cheating on his mother, and the fight that they end up having that ended up, you know, divorcing them, and he just can't shake that from his head. And I think that was just such an interesting thing to do, because a lot of shows, you know, they wouldn't really make that big of a deal out of it, but when you have someone like Otis who is so socially awkward, this really does make a lot of sense why he is a little bit more closed off, why he doesn't want to do those sort of things, why he's so inexperienced. It's not because of his awkwardness, it's because of the fact that he isn't willing to take that step. He isn't willing to overcome that anxiety, and I think that's something that we are going to see him do in the next season for sure. And going back to what I said, the one character that I felt was a little bit rushed was Ola. I understand her inclusion in the show. Again, you know, Jean is dating her father, and her and Otis are going to connect in that way, but their relationship just did not feel as natural as I think it should have. It honestly did feel quite rushed. And look, I get it that Otis is finally finding a girl that he connects with, and, you know, it doesn't have anything to do with the sex clinic and things like that, so he can be very open and honest with her, and she even knows about Maeve and knows about things that they've been doing. And she's fine with that, so I understand that, but I just felt they could have introduced her a little bit earlier on, maybe if they had some scenes together, because a lot of the season hinted at Maeve and Otis being together, and I'm not upset that they're not together. I like that. I like that we're waiting to get these two together, because it would feel too rushed if they were together in this season. If Maeve actually successfully went to Otis and confessed her feelings and they end up together, I would have been disappointed, because I think it would have felt very rushed, and it felt like they just kind of did that because, you know, they just kind of did that because they didn't want to wait. I actually like it when shows wait, and I think the show is going to wait. Like I said, I don't think those two are going to end up together for quite some time. I just did not really feel as much between Ola and Otis. I really did love that final scene, but I just did not feel the full impact of what the show wanted me to overall. I think they could have given her a little bit more. Overall, guys, Sex Education was a huge surprise for me. I enjoyed this show immensely. It's very well written. It has some amazing characters, some hilarious moments. It's got some great acting all across the board. It's a lot more insightful than I was expecting. It dives into some really deep issues that I was not really expecting them to go in. Overall, it's just a very well done show that I really do wish was getting a lot more attention. I've not heard too many people talk about this show, and I really wish it was gaining more attention, because I truly do think it is something great. It's a really great character-driven show from Netflix, and it's one that I really do hope all of you do give a watch. And I'm definitely going to give Sex Education Season 1 overall an A-. Seriously, guys, if you haven't seen this one, check this out immediately. I think this is definitely one of Netflix's strongest new shows in a long time. I really do hope that this is one of those that they do end up renewing. They've been canceling things left and right lately, and I am hoping that this is not one of the next ones on the chopping block. But either way, guys, to my review, the first season of Sex Education. Let me know what you guys saw of the season overall. Leave your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.